Welcome, welcome everybody. Thanks for joining. We're going to wait about 2 minutes to allow everybody to get online and log in. So just while we're waiting, if you can drop your location in the chat, would love to hear where you're tuning in from. Okay, we're already coast to coast. Some Toronto, Halifax, Windsor, Edmonton. All right. Hello, Jose from Montreal. Kelowna. Good morning, Vancouver. Some Central Ontario here, Ottawa, Toronto, lots of Toronto here. I am also in Toronto and the weather is not friendly right now. Okay, so just one more minute and we'll jump right in. Really excited today, folks, to be talking about mental health. And we're really lucky today to be speaking with Dr. Rachel Toledano. Really excited to learn from her. And we're just almost at that mark. So I'm seeing the chat slowly decrease in sharing where people are from. So I'll jump in and get started. Again, everybody, thanks again for tuning in. Really excited to be doing this webinar in partnership with Inkblot Therapy. And before I get started, want to do a quick land acknowledgement, because in order to recognize the original stewards of the land that we now live on, it is really important to acknowledge this in a pathway forward for truth and reconciliation. So of course, we know that the city of Toronto acknowledges that we are on the traditional land of many nations, including Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, and others, and is home to many diverse First Nations, Inuit, and Métis people. So really important to us to acknowledge that. And in the spirit of acknowledgement, would also, of course, like to acknowledge the Inkblot Therapy team who is with us today, of course, Dr. Toledano, as well as the Humies content team who have done a lot of work behind the scenes and are continuing to do a lot of work behind the scenes in order to help facilitate this webinar. So let's quickly talk about why we're here. We're here because in the middle of a pandemic, we have all picked up, moved home, and now are really understanding that companies are looking to transition back to the office. So we really want to have a conversation focused on what we should be thinking about, what you should be thinking about if you are a people manager, and the types of questions and ways that you can cope as an individual who may be thinking about what that transition back to the office looks like. And even if not, what does the transition look like if you're staying completely remote? So we have lots of really good questions and discussion here. And so by way of introduction, folks, my name is Andrea Bartlett. I am the Director of People Operations at Humie, so oversee all things HR. And I'd like now to pass the mic over to Dr. Toledano.
Thanks, Andrea. Well, thank you for all for joining. It's really nice to be here. I'm Dr. Rachel Toledano. I'm a clinical psychologist, and I'm VP of Clinical Services at Inkblot Therapy, which is a digital-first online platform where you can access therapy, be matched with different clinicians that can help you out with different mental health issues. So I'll be happy to answer any questions and help Andrea with trying to inform people a little bit about how to better manage yet another transition throughout the pandemic.
Fantastic. And thank you. So in terms of the lay of the land here, this really is meant to be an engaging session. So we would love to hear from you folks. I'm also just seeing we have someone tuning in from Nigeria. So welcome and thank you for tuning in. But in terms of what we are looking to for the participants today, we ask that you use the Q&A feature. So at the bottom of your screen, you can see the Q&A function as opposed to the chat. And why? Like I mentioned, we have team members behind the scenes who are helping in order to facilitate some of those questions. So please feel free to drop any questions that you want answered or that are top of mind for you in that Q&A feature. So let's get started. We'll start off the top, Rachel. I'm really curious because there's the number of people who are saying how they've developed routines over the course of the pandemic. So one of the questions that we have is from an individual who's saying that it took them a really long time to get used to working remotely and make that transition. So they're asking, how do they jump into a new routine without feeling too overwhelmed?
Yeah, that's a very common question, and a great question. Um, I would say that we're creatures of habits as human beings. We like what is a routine. We get really comfortable in doing things a certain way. I think that's why we struggled a lot when we had to go from in person to working at home. And I would say that we have to remember that we're very good at adapting. As long as we allow ourselves time to adapt and are tolerant of the transition period during which it may feel a bit uncomfortable, or it may feel a little, not peak performance, not flowing yet. But once we, the same way we adapted from the office to home, we're gonna readapt to going from home work to working from the office again. So I would say, like, just believe in your human ability to adapt, and be patient with yourself, tolerant, no self-criticism, no stress around, I gotta be on, no matter where I am, I have to be on the same way all the time, 24/7. There's no gray zone, it's black and white. We want to avoid the black and white thinking. It's either perfect or it's terrible. So we may go through a period where we're at 60% of what we normally would be at in terms of performance or output. And that's okay, because we're gradually going to get back to our 100% over time. So giving us time to adapt.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you. And so there's a question here that's just come in that might be specific to some folks who live in maybe more urban cities, and it's around commuting. I know Humi is at downtown Toronto office. We have this question coming in quite often, actually. And so they're asking that what advice you might have for commuting. This individual, like many of us, gets fairly anxious when they think about having to commute, people not respecting social distancing, people not respecting wearing masks. And so what advice do you have for individuals who are now having to cope with the anxiety that comes with the commute to get to the office?
Yeah, I definitely understand that anxiety. So we're talking about having to do something during which we won't have as much control. So we talk a lot about acceptance in terms of being more serene and less anxious, accepting the things we can't control, and at the same time, actively changing the things that we can, right? It's the serenity prayer. I don't know if you've heard of it. So I have to get to the office. I have to take public transport. I have no choice. That's not something I can change. What am I going to do before and during my public transport? So before, I can definitely do some, diaphragmatic breathing, try to reevaluate the way I'm thinking. Am I in my what ifs? What ifs are usually the things where we start anticipating negatively all the horrible things, all the horror movies that can happen. And those are not realities. Those are actually just, negative anticipations of potential scenarios around what could happen, but they haven't happened. So the anxiety that's caused by anticipatory thoughts it's not an anxiety that is productive in any way, because all those things we anticipate might happen, might not happen as well. So I would say it's called cognitive reevaluation. It's a strategy that we use a lot in cognitive therapy, where we challenge our thinking to remain in facts and reality. I don't know that I'm going to catch COVID just because I'm in public transportation. I can wear my mask. I can use, disinfectant gel. I can try to sit a little further, but there's even if there isn't that much space, it doesn't mean I am absolutely going to catch COVID, right? But when I say, what if I catch COVID, my brain kind of turns on anxiety as if it's going to happen. So it's a lot about dealing with things as they come instead of being in future negative catastrophic scenarios. And then while you're actually in the bus or in public transit, are you focused on the potential threat, or are you trying to create some strategies of distraction, which is usually very effective, such as, I don't know, how about I read my novel? How about I do I put on my music and focus on the words in the song? How about I work on Sudoku? There's many things that we can do to distract ourselves, to not allow our brain to go into these catastrophic scenarios and negative anticipations and worries that create anxiety. So I'd say those are things you can control. Those are things you can change how you cope with a stressor. But the stressor itself, you'll see people sitting next to you in the bus who are totally relaxed and listening to their music or reading their book. How come they're relaxed and I'm not? Right? It's all about interpretation and where we allow our brain to go. So I would say just be very aware of where you're letting your brain travel to, and rein it in, keep it focused on things that are neutral or positive. And if we're going to catch COVID, we're going to catch COVID. If we're in public transport, we have to take it every day. We're going to be there. So whether we worry about it or not is not what's going to prevent it from happening. But we're not going to worry about having COVID before we catch COVID, right? So, we talk about COVID, there's anxieties around many different aspects of life where we can have this mode of functioning, and it creates a lot of anxiety that is easily manageable.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. So really sounds like then focusing on the facts and focusing on what's in front of you as being really important. Okay, so speaking of focusing on what's in front of you, we've had our computers in front of us. We've been staring maybe at the same walls within our homes for over a year now. And we're now coping with the idea of seeing people for the first time, being in office with people and meeting people again that you have been shoulders, floating heads on a screen for the last year. So another question came through saying that I haven't interacted with many people in the last year. How do I go about socializing with my coworkers without overwhelming myself? That's a great one.
Great question. In my experience recently, what I've been hearing a lot is that people put pressure on themselves to get back to normal. In reality, we're in a new normal, So again, it's a period of transition. And I think it's important to go almost like a gradual exposure, right? So maybe the first day, I won't put pressure on myself to say hi to everyone. Maybe I'll start off by just getting more comfortable again with being around people at work and say hi to the people I know really well. Or not just say hi like that, but actually interact and say, how are you? And kind of, chit chat a bit with the people I'm super comfortable with. And then tomorrow and the day after, I'll try with people I know, but, I don't know. I'm not super familiar with them. And then I'll introduce myself to those that I don't know at all, that I've never met in person. So we could do what we call gradual exposure, is go with what you can handle. Don't pressure yourself to go faster than you can handle, because if it's stressing you, you're going to get a negative loop started where you feel anxious. And then the next day you're anticipating that you're going to feel anxious. It gets worse and worse and worse. So go with a slow pace, gradually, at your level of comfort, and be okay to say no if there are social events, Be okay to say no, not today. I'm not available. I would encourage other employees or colleagues not to pressure people to join. So sometimes it comes from a good intention. It's like, no, come, we want to get to know you. And if the person says no, or even like made up an excuse, like I have no babysitter, I have to go home, like don't say, oh, I have a perfect babysitter for you. This is an example that someone gave us at work, where it's like, sometimes you just don't want to do it. You're not ready. And just respecting that for yourself and for others to respect that, it's okay for people to not engage as we would normally expect, because we're not in a normal time.
Okay. And that's great. It actually segues nicely into another question, which it's a question around boundaries.
Sorry, I'm just trying to turn on my light. Hold on. I've got an automatic light that turns off on its own. Sorry. Yes, questions are
it. We are too still. So Rachel, one of the questions again is around boundaries. So we talk about, people with great intentions and some people being much more excited than others, and really recommended there a gradual approach with it, which I think is fantastic. But how do individuals go about communicating some of those boundaries, whether it's gradual, whether they might be an individual who's completely okay with physical contact? What do you recommend for those to communicate those boundaries?
Well, first of all, do you know what your boundaries are is very important, right? So like acknowledging for yourself, this is not feeling good to me. This is probably a time when I need to communicate my boundary to others. And then, I think when we say things just diplomatically, but honestly and directly, it's the best formula for assertiveness, because we're really talking about asserting our boundaries. So the formula for assertiveness is, when you are this close, I kind of feel uncomfortable. I would like, please, that we keep some space. So it's I feel I would like, right? That's the formula for asserting ourselves. And then, what we're asserting is our boundaries in this case. Most people will respect that automatically. If it's said so honestly and directly and openly, there won't be a debate around that, right? Now, some people have trouble with that. It's not always easy. They anticipate, what if the person gets upset? What if it causes a conflict? What if the person doesn't take it well?
People pleasers.
Yes, and people who just have a hard time saying no,
Yeah.
Not everybody is assertive. And I would say to those people, look, at that moment, you have two choices in front of you. Either you put other people's feelings before yours, or you put your feelings in front of other people's feelings. And be careful, again, factually, you don't know that the person's going to be upset or that it's going to cause a conflict. You're now negatively anticipating the outcome of your assertiveness, of your setting a boundary. So how about we try it? Try it with someone that you're comfortable with. Try the formula, tell them, this is how I feel I would like, and see how they react. And usually when it's a positive outcome, they feel rewarded, and it gives them more, let's say, courage to do it again in a different situation with a different person.
Okay. That's great. So we've talked again about the transition and the commute boundaries, and around boundaries, there's an important question here around burnout. So burnout has been top of mind for, I think, all of us who certainly have been experiencing it. I know it's top of mind for me, managing teams at Hume, and what we do to actually respond to that. And so this individual is right now working 9 to 6. They're working remotely. But when we add in the commute, that will now stretch from around 7 a.m. until 8 p.m. because of commuting, more social events, and whatnot. So they're nervous about the potential burnout while they make that shift to the workday being in office and being longer. So what advice do you have to avoid that kind of burnout?
Well, working, being out of the house from 7 a.m. to 8 p.m. is a lot. So there's, that's a reality.
Mhm.
What do you do as of 7 p.m.? And each person's life at home, sometimes we have a second job at home, if we're a parent and we have to cook and clean and do homework. There's many things that might be going on. The question I would ask is, when do you have time to take care of you, replenish your gas tank, make sure that your batteries are full? What do you do during the commute? Are you in the car? What are you doing in the car? Are you listening to music? Are you listening to a podcast? Is it something that could be a time where you are, yes, driving, but also replenishing to a certain degree? How can we use that time effectively? Right? If you're in public transport, same thing, right? But at the end of the day, it's a matter of, making sure that on your time off, you do have those times for self-care, right? So exercising, sleeping enough hours, eating, healthy foods, having time for leisure and social activities, laughing, having fun. Those are all I call it the factors that create a cushion around us to reduce the impact of everyday life stress. So are your cushions, there? Are they full, or are they empty? And, the impact of stress is going to affect you very quickly. So we have to kind of also take responsibility for making that a priority in our personal time. And I would say also, like, let's not forget that you probably were doing that before the pandemic. How did you manage? If you were already feeling burnt out back then, when you were already on that schedule, maybe that's self-care, that you have to reevaluate what you do to take care of yourself. And maybe you weren't at all feeling burnt out. So what makes you think you will be this time around? So it's just a matter, again, of not assuming that it's not going to go well. Maybe you're actually going to enjoy your time at work, being with colleagues, going out for lunch with some colleagues. And that's going to be a factor that replenishes you, right? So maybe it'll be more positive than we expect. So the idea is, again, let's not assume. Let's go with the flow and adjust as we need, as things happen. If it is, really difficult, maybe I'll discuss with my manager, is there a way to, balance it out? So this is something we're probably going to talk about more at some point today, but the idea of opening communication with our managers around, if I'm feeling burnt out, if I'm feeling I'm not doing well, is there something that we can do to find a balance that works for me, where I will be able to replenish my batteries?
Mm-hmm. That's great. We will be transitioning actually into more of the people manager and more of the company questions, but we still have quite a few really top of mind ones coming in from individuals right now. And so this one question actually circles back to boundaries. And so I wanted to follow up with this, because in some instances where individuals have communicated their boundaries, I have heard some organizations struggling with colleagues respecting those. And so how do you reinforce your boundaries when you have asserted them, but for whatever reason, they're not being respected? What do you recommend there?
That's really a case-by-case answer for that one, I would say. Because in general, I would say, as a rule of thumb, most people, after you've tell them the first time, they will respect your boundaries. However, there are always people who want to test boundaries and may not respect them right away. I would say let's give them a chance. Repeat the boundary a second time. If after that it's still not being respected, I would say that the third time you have to kind of really verbalize the consequence if the person doesn't keeps on not respecting your boundary. Because the art of setting boundaries is not, it's like a stop sign. If the rule was you have to stop at the stop sign, but you would never get a ticket or lose points if you didn't, many people would not stop at the stop sign, right? So sometimes you have to say, if you keep doing this, if you don't respect my boundary, here's what I'm going to do about it. There's going to be a consequence. And then we have to evaluate. The consequence is really case by case, depending on the situation.
Okay. That's great. And I actually never thought of that. The stop sign analogy really helps. And I know within our team, communicating what those boundaries are, and just communication in general has really shifted with online, and that transition to online and remote and including individuals is definitely something that we're in the process of figuring out what to do as well. So thank you. So we of course have different people tuning in from all different industries, and so this question is actually from somebody that's in a frontline type of role, and they're a teacher, and they ask how they should deal with situations when students come into school who are visibly sick, whether they're sneezing, coughing, etc. And then the follow-up there and related is, what do I do in an office setting if I again see someone with similar symptoms?
I would say that this is a bigger issue where I think that there should be clear communication around how does a school encourage teachers to treat such cases. Like what's the process? If a kid comes to class, they're sneezing, they're coughing, that the teacher feels A, backed up by the school, right? And B, knows exactly what the process is in a situation such as that one, so that it doesn't feel like they're picking on they're picking on the situation. If all teachers have the same game plan and the school backs up the teachers and the team feels cohesive and united in the plan of action, I think the teacher is going to have a lot less stress in dealing with those situations, right? So it's the same for back to the office. Like, we all need to have clear rules and boundaries and processes around, what happens in there's going to be new situations we've never dealt with before. So trying to figure it out on your own might become very stressful. Whereas, going to your manager and saying, do we have a process around this? What do I do? What do I do about this? And bringing in a teammate or someone, like a manager who can help you through managing that situation, I think is going to be very helpful in terms of reducing individual stress in those situations.
Okay, great. And that it's easy to think about it's challenging to think about the differences when we are all working in such different environments. And so that question shed a lot of light to me with just the risk associated with working in different industries. So thank you for who asked that. And it begs the question about how an individual then raises a physical or mental health concern to their manager. So you talked about that escalation process and maybe bringing another individual when there's that physical concern. But this next question asks, how does an employee raise a mental health concern with a manager who has used slightly stigmatizing language previously, because they maybe don't believe that mental health is a real issue? So what advice do you have for individuals who are experiencing that?
That's a tough one. So I would say everybody has a higher up. Your manager might have their own manager, their own lead. You may need to go to HR. You may need to go, to someone different to address your concerns. I think you also need to get backed up if really you're not being taken seriously and you feel like your mental health concerns are being dismissed, and not acknowledged, not addressed, I would encourage that you speak to your doctor also around getting some formal backup. Now, there's a difference between, I'm really struggling mental health wise and nobody cares in the workplace, versus you've got where you can really get some backup medically to support accommodations, to support even a sick leave if needed, right? Because some of it is more along the lines of what is the employer doing to make sure their leadership is, very aware and well trained to deal with these situations, to understand mental health and mental health concerns, to understand cultural diversity, to understand physical limitations of people who might have, I don't know, a learning disability, or this comes from what we call psychoeducation. The more knowledge we give, the less stigma people are going to display. But you're always going to run into a person who might be really closed-minded or have their way of seeing things, and at that point you need backup. You need to feel supported otherwise. And it's important to not feel scared to reach out to HR, not feel scared to reach out to, a professional who might be able to help you, to help back you up, to not feel alone in that struggle.
Mm-hmm. That's great. So you talked about leadership. There's a lot of questions for managers and people leaders and leadership. So I'll start with this first one. Leadership in our organization are reporting that they're noticing that employees are exhibiting anxiety, irritability, apathy, anger, and that there are increased conflicts between coworkers. How would you help leaders make sense of this behavior and how they should respond?
So I would say it makes sense in terms of what we're seeing globally, because there is what I like to call the mental health pandemic going on, which is a secondary pandemic. And everybody's a bit more on edge, a bit more tired, a bit more stressed. And you're going to get those, also differences between how to behave within the pandemic. Those who are getting vaccinated and those who are anti-vax and it's created a schism between people, the pandemic. People that you've always been friends with, all of a sudden you're like, really? That's how you think? That's your value system? You're finding out things. And there's tensions everywhere. And I think the first part is that leaders should be aware that the pandemic is ongoing, and that, yes, people will not be themselves as a result of, the stressors and the mental health pressures that we're all feeling, all of us. So almost to expect it and prepare for it rather than be surprised by it, And then I think that in terms of managing it, there's many ways to manage, conflicts among employees. It could be, it could be one-on-one talks. It could be, let's get a mediator. And if it's a more severe, conflictual issue, it could be also reuniting the team, through like social events. And the social events don't have to be in person necessarily. It could be like, guys, let's do an after work social gathering and just chit chat and get to know each other on a more personal level, and recreate that team cohesion in an environment that's positive. So there's many different things that we can do. But the key one is open communication. Like we have to be able to talk to each other and sit the problem down on a piece of paper and really problem solve together. and see what's going on. Why are you feeling this way? What is there something we can do to help, to alleviate some of this? But we can only do that through communication, both ways. So the employer or manager leadership has a role to play, but the employee also has a role in terms of coming forward and opening up a bit, right? So we really have to create a psychologically healthy environment and a safe culture around talking about these things, that it won't be judged, that it won't be seen as oh, you're weak, you're not capable of coping, like reassuring people that they're not going to be judged negatively for saying I'm struggling and I'm not okay.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that's one of the interesting expectations that employees have of leadership. And it's a reasonable one, albeit there seems that there's this expectation of the perfect plan, that leadership will roll out this perfect plan, that the return back to the office is going to be without any hiccups, and that the communication is going to be perfect. And the biggest takeaway that you just you gave to me is the fact that it really is both ways. We talk about managing up in career building, but there really is, managing up expectations when it comes to employees advocating for their own mental well-being. And I think that's a really important takeaway, and it was for me. So thank you. Now, Rachel, you talked about vaccinations. This, I think, is the biggest question that I know we get asked at HUME. I know I get asked often. And so it's obviously a very touchy subject, like you said, and it's changing some dynamics between relationships and between colleagues that have never happened before. And so what recommendations do you have for individuals who are looking to diffuse the tension when things and the discussion around vaccinations inevitably comes up in the workplace?
It's like politics. You gotta, I think there's certain topics that you shouldn't delve into. Just respect that and accept, and then respect that different people have different, values or perceptions of vaccinations, of other things. And that if it's a touchy subject, and you see that the tensions are getting to be a little bit difficult, like, just don't go there. Like, stop the conversation, talk about something else. Don't try to convince people of your perspective. If it's a nice discussion and it's two open people who are willing to see each other's perspectives and maybe are open-minded to putting their own into question, it's fine. But let's not try to force our way of seeing things and our ideas and our opinions on others, because that doesn't work. We don't respond well to that. We get defensive and it becomes messy very quickly. Yeah. So don't try to diffuse it, is what I'm saying. What I'm saying is just, this sounds like a little bit of a difficult, topic, a touchy subject. Let's leave it alone.
Yeah. And I know as somebody who's leading the HR team at HUME, and certainly within my ecosystem of HR professionals, there's sometimes that added pressure that it's expected that HR intervenes and that HR needs to interject and really act as that liaison between what leadership is looking for. And so I think that's really important, that sometimes it's okay to say that this isn't the right place, and that it's not always HR's responsibility to be the diffuser of that kind of tension, because it can end up making things much worse. And I will say that the content team at HUME also released a talking about vaccination blog. So if individuals have specific questions, and I see things coming in the chat around how do managers manage employees who don't want to get vaccinated and some of the legalities around that. And so I would encourage those who are curious about that really to check out the blog post, because there's both the social, the communication, and then of course some of the legal elements around asking and talking about vaccinations in the workplace. So I encourage people to check that out.
Yeah, I can I just add that it's we're very quick to judge those who don't want to get vaccinated, and
Mhm.
some just don't want to get vaccinated, but some have legitimate medical or other reasons why they're not getting vaccinated. So I think it's important to just bear in mind that we don't have all the pieces of the puzzle, and that judging someone just because they're not getting vaccinated, we hope that most people will get vaccinated. It's going to facilitate things, but at the same time, just try to respect, other people's decisions around these things. Um, I think it's really important because I do have people who have come to me and really feel ostracized and stigmatized. And it affects their mental health in the opposite way, where because they're not getting vaccinated, now they're being they feel discriminated against, they feel stigmatized, they feel negatively judged, and their mental health is now being impacted negatively. So we have to be very careful. It can go both ways.
Mhm. Absolutely. Vaccinations. I never thought in my career that I would have
Such
to
a
delve
topic.
into the science behind this, but all fantastic questions, and important not to be ostracizing team members, both as a colleague and as a manager. I think that that's something that is certainly new for me and certainly new for some of our leadership team members. So I really love what you said there. So some questions around managing people and managing teams, and the anxiety there. So, Rachel, what do you think the best way to manage a team that is experiencing anxiety about returning to office to ensure that they feel that they're able to take things at their own pace while still meeting that remote expectation that we talked about might have been even greater?
It depends on the context. Again, like you said, we have many different kinds of employers that are potentially listening today. Depends on the sector. I would say the trend that we're seeing right now, that helps people feel less anxious, is having discussions around what's comfortable for you. You've worked at home for a year and a half. Clearly it works. Maybe, there are some perks, definitely, and maybe there are some disadvantages, just like there are perks and disadvantages to be at work in person.
Mhm.
Having maybe a policy around hybrid, if it's possible. So for some work sites, it's impossible. You must be at work in person. But whenever possible, can we allow some flexibility? Can we allow people to verbalize themselves what their preference is and try to accommodate those preferences as much as possible? So that doesn't mean it's it's a free-for-all, like it still has to be, approved by managers. Now, in terms of managing the anxiety itself of returning to work, there's a few things. One is, we like, as managers, we, like, for example, I'm thinking with Inkblot, we have a webinar that we're doing right now around really managing return to work in person, providing tools and strategies specifically around that. That's one thing. We can encourage employees to access use their benefit plans, to consult, to access their EAP. And then we can also help employees to see the positive side of being in person. So people are like, when we're anxious, we only see the negative. It's called the mental filter. It's one of our cognitive distortions. We see all the negative, we forget that there's a bunch of positive. So helping employees remember, why was it positive to be at work? What were the good things? Oh, it's true. When I got to work, there were croissants and orange juice waiting for me every morning. I don't have that at home. Oh, and I used to meet my friend Jolene, in the kitchen, and we would, chit chat for 10 minutes before. That was fun, actually, like just remembering that there are many positive aspects to being at work. So while allowing yourself to acknowledge and having managers validate that it's normal to feel that way, we can also at the same time point out and remind the positive fun stuff about being in the office, and making sure that there's organization around creating positive vibes at the office. It's not just like, okay, I'm going to the office, I'm sitting in front of my computer, logging out, and create fun stuff. A lot of companies used to have like yoga lunch classes, or lunch and learns with a presenter that would come in, and different things that make your day at work, you're happy to be out of the house, so refreshing the memory that it could be fun to be in the office.
Good vibes are going to be important as we start to even meet colleagues in person for the first time. And you actually answered a question that came in around what we can do in order to reintegrate and make that return to office more appealing after being really comfortable at home. And I think that's really great advice. So Rachel, this next question is around something you talked about in the hybrid model. And I know I'm seeing it everywhere online. I'm reading about it. I think it's probably the new norm, right? A bit of a in-person expectation and remote expectation. So then the question becomes, for not only managers, but also employees, how and what advice do you have for individuals who are managing now that dual expectation, where meetings may be in person and remote? And how do we go about actually managing that without leaving some of our colleagues out?
You mean like if there's a meeting going on and some people are actually in person and some people are online?
Yes.
Kind of like what teachers have had to deal with almost all year.
Exactly.
Well, listen, I think everything is a matter of creating good habits right from the get-go, right? So if you're going to have, half a team, they're in front of you physically in that room, and then half the team on screen, creating a really a consistency and a habit around making sure that those that are on screen, that someone is checking the screen for questions. We have these like little hands up in Zoom meetings and things like that somebody is assigned maybe, to check that the people who are on screen don't have questions, to ask the people on screen questions actively, things like that. What's funny? Oh, like, did I say something funny?
No, I'm kidding, because so many people are hit and miss with raising that hand or not.
I see. Yeah. So I would say like, just make sure to create some habits as the person who's going to run the meetings. Create some strategy and habits, get some help to make sure there's attention on both, and encourage those who are online to contribute to the meeting, right? So ask questions to like, what do you guys think?
Yeah. And I know at HUME and my team specifically, we've obviously been talking about this pretty extensively, and we've also made a commitment to one another that natural post-office chit chat, that you leave a meeting room and you kind of walk away and maybe go get a coffee. And we've committed to each other that in that chit chat that's going to happen, as that happens, we have committed to writing that within our group channel as a team, just as a way for the team to be included. And specifically, if anything, deadlines were talked about, things and opinions about something comes up, we've committed to one another that we'll continue to include those who are remote and who aren't able to be a part of that, again, just natural evolution of conversation. So I think that's something tactically that we're doing. So this next question is top of mind for those who have joined and maybe changed roles over COVID. So the question is, what advice you have for people who have started at a new company or in a new job since COVID started, and this individual feels like there's an expectation to be comfortable since they've been with their company for 9 months, they've maybe engaged, so they're not new anymore. And I will preface this by saying that at HUME, we're actually calling this re-onboarding. So it's not only onboarding the individuals who are brand new, but the fact that as a team and the people ops group, we are now looking at how do we re-onboard those who aren't new and now feel awkward asking where's the bathroom and where do I go for this? And how do I get this resource that's in office that they didn't think about when they were at home? So Rachel, again, what advice do you have for people who started in a new job? And how do you manage those expectations so that people can re-onboard themselves?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I think there's two aspects. One is, what is the employer doing to, re-onboard, right? So maybe just really being aware that, hey, all of these people from the team weren't here when we left and started working from home. Let's do something to help them integrate into the physical space. Let's show them around. Let's do a first day back of just showing them around, meeting people in person and things like that. So that's the employer part. For the employee, I think that it depends on their personality a lot, respecting their pace. And I would say, like, the best strategy, I'm thinking of what we do with people who have social anxiety. And we tell them, tell people you're feeling awkward about this. Like, just let it out that this is weird for you. It's uncomfortable. You're feeling a little anxious and awkward. Once it's out there, you don't have to hide it anymore, right? Because people try to hide that they're feeling anxious or awkward. And that creates more anxiety. Am I hiding it properly? Are people going to catch on that I'm feeling awkward? If you just say, this is really weird for me, but where's the bathroom? Like, now you don't have to hide it anymore. So you have one less stress, maybe assigning a peer also, someone who can really be their go-to person instead of always having to ask different people. So, okay, pairing them up for a few days with someone that they can feel comfortable with, maybe ask them who they would like to be paired up with, So there's many different little strategies that we can use, but I would still put some of the responsibility on the employee to allow themselves the time to adjust and that it's okay to not get it right or to look weird or feel like it's weird, or it's fine. Like, I'm going to do the best I can,
Yeah. What's that song? It's okay not to be okay.
Okay,
And that psychological safety though is so critical, because even new managers who are in the midst of this transition now, either managing a team or joining as a manager, are also going to have those kinds of questions. And I think as colleagues and people managers, it's important to share that experience and be open about it. So I love that advice. And
yeah, that's a great point, by the way. The point of managers or leaders also verbalizing, sharing that it's weird for them too, that they may be going through a rough time too, like being models, right? Let's not forget that leaders are human. They also have their stresses. They also have their anxieties. They also have their internal pressures to perform and to look a certain way. And so if the leaders are being more authentic and natural they're being great models. They're saying it's okay to struggle. It's okay to feel weird. It's okay to be stressed. If my leader shows me that they can be open about that, I'm going to have much better chances of feeling comfortable to do the same.
Absolutely. So we talked about managing up, and this question has two parts to it. So how does an individual manage up and communicate those needs without coming across as selfish, which is an interesting question. And then they're sharing that, after all, not everything is not only doable for the company, but they're worried about it not being fair and creating an imbalance between other colleagues.
Okay, so forgive my ignorance as a psychologist. What do you mean by managing up?
So it's the concept of, for example, with my team, we obviously have performance check-ins. We talk about goals and metrics, but oftentimes employees do not have the opportunity to give feedback to their manager. And so as a manager, I always ask my team, what can I do better? How do you like to be recognized and rewarded? And what am I missing? So what do I need to do and how do I need to improve? It's often forgotten about, right? Where leaders, like you said, are almost have this perception where they don't have feelings and they have all the answers. And at Humi, we foster that culture of making sure that it goes both ways. And so this question is around managing up those expectations. So the individual or the employee communicating their boundaries and communicating their needs, even if they're different from their colleagues and they're worried about coming across as selfish.
I always say there is such a thing as healthy selfishness. So, let's not get lost in extremes. Again, remember I was saying the black and white thinking. It's not either I'm selfless and a great employee, or I'm selfish and no, like there's a middle ground between trying to stay aware of the collective need and trying to take care of your own needs and your own feelings. And we're allowed to sometimes put our feelings first because it's important, or to make an ask and, to say like, I'm going to ask, I'm going to, bring this up. It's important to me. This is how I feel. It doesn't mean I'm going to get what I want, but maybe we can work out a middle ground where I'm more comfortable, or where I'm getting part of what I need, right? That's not selfish. That is actually healthy behavior.
Yeah. And sometimes it's easy to feel selfish when you might be the only one who's doing it. So, yeah.
Surprisingly, and this is the same with people who have anxiety, when one person brings it up, all of a sudden 3, 4, 5, 6, 10 other people say, yeah, me too. I feel that way too. It just takes one person, but to have the courage to bring it up. Usually if I say, oh, I suffer from anxiety, you're going to have about 15 people around you that say, me too. You know, you just have to have the courage to step up. And who are you stepping up for? Yourself.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
But again, I think that if the environment at work is safe, it feels safe, there's a culture that it's okay, then we're going to have a lot less of that feeling of, am I going to look selfish?
Exactly. Well, we are almost at time. So I have one last question. And then while we're talking about this, my colleagues are just going to pull up some of the reminders as we close here. But on the topic of returning back to work, the question is, how do I go about having a conversation to my workplace about how the return to office will look and how it will be safe, especially when looking for a new workplace to work for and bringing this conversation up early in the process? So there's two things. How do you go about bringing that up for your existing role and team and company? And then for those who are on the call who might be actively looking for work or looking for a new role, at what point is it appropriate to bring up what that expectation is for returning to office?
I think the second it crosses your mind is an appropriate time to bring it up.
Okay.
No reason to wait for an ideal time. There will be none. I think we need to keep in mind that this is not a weird question nowadays. And I think we also need to keep in mind that employers don't have all the answers. And the answer we might get is ambiguous, and it's okay to say, I'm not sure I'm comfortable with that ambiguous answer. So, as soon as we have a concern, now we're talking about this, but any concern, it's okay to ask. It's okay to talk about it. Even if you're interviewing for a new job and that is a question that you have, it's a legitimate question. And it's not a weird one in the days that we're in. People expect that question, we just might not have all the answers yet because there are legal implications, there are government rules, there are things that we have to figure out, so I think it's okay for leaders also to say we're working on it as soon as we know we're gonna communicate about it. We don't have all the answers yet.
Exactly. And I know rather than having a date looming over people's heads at Humi just yet, one thing that we've committed to for our company is a minimum notice period. So we've committed to our company that you will have at least 1 month heads up when the office will be reopened. And so I think that approach also leaves room for that flexibility and some of those unknowns, especially if there's regulations changing in the background that we have, no ability to change. But thank you, Rachel. It's almost 2:00, so wanted to thank you so much.
It's 2:00.
My computer's telling us it's 2:00. I cannot thank you enough for your time and for your advice. I know with how many questions came in that, lots of people participating really saw value in this. So thank you again for partnering with us on this important topic. And as we talked about talent war in that last question and just, what it's like to be interviewing, I will also say that HUME has an upcoming webinar around a roundup for latest recruiting features and questions of how to manage recruiting in a post-pandemic environment, which is happening August 26th at 1 p.m. So would like to thank everybody for participating. Again, thank you so much, Rachel, for being here today.
Thanks, for having me.
Absolutely. And thank you to the team behind the scenes. Have a great day, everybody. Take care.
Thanks. Bye-bye.
Bye.